So y'all are figuring out how this is going to go, right? Hey, everybody, and Dim, thank you for that very gracious and kind introduction, and thank you all for having me here today. This is actually the 5th time that I've had the honor and privilege of speaking with you. The first time was the early 90s. I was a young state representative, and the topic was the need for fiscal reform and stabilizing the state's tax base. It's an awfully good thing we took care of that in the 90s, right? The second time was the early 2000s. Lamar was a newly hatched public company, and I shared our experience of going and being public with you. The third time was post-Katrina. Governor Blanco had appointed me to the Louisiana Recovery Authority, and I gave an update on recovery efforts and reform initiatives and the Road Home program. Yes, the Road Home. That made the LRA and Kathleen very popular. The fourth time was 2011, and the topic was about LSU and the efforts of Louisiana's flagship coalition to help steer LSU through the effects of the Great Recession and the precipitous drop in state support that followed. So, for my topic today, I'm going to talk about all 4. Lessons learned or not, progress made or not. It's going to come at you pretty fast.
If you don't stop and look around once in a while, you can miss it.
So last year, Governor Edwards appointed me to serve on 2 commissions. One was the Restore Louisiana Task Force. That's the commission that is helping aid the recovery after last year's floods. And the second one was the Task Force on Structural Changes in Budgets and Tax Policy. Come on, floods and taxes. I called the governor up and asked him if we were still friends. I mean, John Bell, what did I do to you? All right, so how are we doing with flood recovery? What have we learned from Katrina? Actually, it's going pretty well. The Restore Louisiana Homeowner Grant Program is far less cumbersome and moving far faster than the Road Home did. One important reason is that the formula for the grant is fairer, easier to calculate, and easier to administer. It's based on the cost to reconstruct a house rather than the pre-storm value of the house, and that's the key difference. Ironically, the Road Home program was originally designed with a formula based on reconstruction costs, but in its infinite wisdom, HUD determined that it couldn't fund a construction program and reconverted it after we launched it into a compensation program. That created a lot of confusion, consternation, and delays, if you recall, and ultimately some unfairness in the grants, as that formula penalized low-income neighborhoods like the 9th Ward, which, by the way, is still struggling. HUD has since been shown the errors of its ways and adopted the cost to reconstruct model, which, as I said, is faster, more efficient, and ultimately more fair. Must we do better? Absolutely. Nothing seems fast, efficient, or even fair when you're flooded out of your house. But it's clear to me that this program will help a lot of people put their lives back together, and it's being emulated in other states like Texas and Florida as we speak. Similarly, FEMA has obviously tightened up its operation since Katrina. Temporary housing options are more flexible and nimble, like shelter at home and cash for hotels rather than clunking expensive travel trailers. Still not perfect, still too costly, but getting better. And an expanded version of the shelter at home program is being piloted as we speak, again, in Texas and Florida. So what hasn't gotten better? What are those things that make you want to tear your hair out? Or more importantly, what are those things, if not solved, could constitute a slow-moving existential threat to our coastal communities? Number one, Federal aid after disasters is still a hodgepodge of siloed federal agencies and programs that often work at cross purposes under different and conflicting rules and timelines. There's FEMA, there's HUD, there's CDBG, there's SBA, there's NFIP, there's HMGP, ETC, ETC, ETC. This inevitably results in needless cost and delays, like having to get an environmental review and impact study on every single home. These are interior renovations. Tens of millions of dollars will be wasted on this needless exercise. Now here's another example that drives me nuts. You all have heard about the problem of SBA loans and the duplication of benefits, so that the amount of the SBA loan you get is deducted from your potential CDBG Restore Louisiana grant. All right, this in effect penalizes the pioneers, the ones who move back first. Those are the people you need to bring neighborhoods and communities back the fastest. But it's worse than that. My assistant, Susie Wassan, she's right there. Susie and Jim live in Watson and were under 2 feet of water. They applied for an SBA loan but did not accept the loan after they qualified for it. Under the rules, this will blow you away, the amount of the loan they qualified for but did not accept is being deducted from their potential Restore Louisiana grant. A benefit they didn't receive is being deemed a duplication of benefits. That is the definition of federal insanity.
Look, this is real simple. Whatever miles we put on, we'll take off. Drive home backwards.
All right, y'all caught that, right? We're driving home backwards. All right. So here's another one. After a disaster, FEMA has money that is available to communities under its hazard mitigation grant program. Up to several $100 million in Louisiana's case after last year's floods, billions after Katrina. Now, one lesson we learned after Katrina is that individual risk mitigation, elevating homes or even relocations, they're time-consuming, costly, and extremely inefficient. Far better to spend those dollars on community risk mitigation, large projects that prevent flooding in the first place and move water away from people and property. But even today, good projects run into a myriad of roadblocks. Take the Comite diversion. Right now, HMGP money is being held up for that project because it's an Army Corps of Engineers project and is therefore ineligible for FEMA funding. Now, the Corps is doing precious little on Comite and has spent negligible dollars doing precious little. Yet one of the most promising projects for mitigating floods can't use HMGP dollars. We can't use hazard mitigation money to mitigate hazard. That is a head scratcher. Between private insurance and public dollars, we will spend about $10 billion recovering from last year's floods. $10 billion. And we can't spend a couple $100 million to help move water the other way. Third, there's a National Flood Insurance Program, NFIP. It's broke, and its fate is uncertain. This is the most pressing, slow-moving existential threat to our coastal communities. And we, as a nation, have not figured it out. It's about risk and cost sharing, but more importantly, it's about a way of life. It's about earning a living. It's about providing the rest of the nation with a huge percentage of their seafood and energy needs. Ours is a working coast, and the rest of the company needs us working it. The National Flood Insurance Program needs to be designed so that we can afford to live on and work the coast that provides so much for the rest of our country. Finally, our flood event is being forgotten. We've been appropriated about half the dollars we've requested and about half the dollars our recovery requires. So we've designed assistance programs that are half funded. Frustrating. What with Harvey, Irma, Maria, and Nate, we're not getting the federal attention we deserve. We're being penalized for having been victims of a no-named storm. So that's, I guess, what we need, a name. I think we should have a naming contest for last year's flood event. All right, with that psych joke done, I want to get sincere about what we've been through as a community. Towns like Watson and dozens of others like it are going to be fine. They'll be fine because of Susie and Jim Wassan, people like them, thousands of other families like them, who have put down a stake, who refuse to quit, whose never say die, can do, will do spirit will rebuild their communities. There's not a government program for that kind of resilience, and thankfully, none is needed. All right, on to fiscal and tax reform.
In 1930, the Republican-controlled House of Representatives, in an effort to alleviate the effects of the, anyone? Great Depression, passed, anyone? The tariff bill, the Hawley-Smoot Tariff Act, which, anyone raised or lowered? Raised, in an effort to collect more revenue for the federal government. Anyone know the effect? It did not work, and the United States sank deeper into the Great Depression. Today, we have a similar debate over this. Anyone know what this is? Class? Anyone?
It's our kids.
Anyone seen this before? The Laffer curve. Anyone know what this says? It says that at this point, the same amount of revenue. This is very controversial. Does anyone know what Vice President Bush called this in 1980? Anyone? Something DOO economics. Voodoo economics.
Any questions?
Well, sums it up.
All right. Okay, seriously, look, all we need to do is broaden the base and lower the rates. It's very simple. Broaden the base, lower the rates. Everybody now, broaden the base, lower the rates. See how easy that was? Now look, over 25 years ago, we had this debate about broadening the base on property taxes by lowering the homestead exemption. Now you want to talk about an existential crisis, at least for the politicians brave enough to talk about them. Just ask Buddy Romer. So the homestead exemption isn't so much the focus today. Why? Number one, rising home prices, time and inflation, if you will, have effectively broadened the residential property tax base. Homestead exemption stays the same, values go up, base gets broadened. So that's the number one reason why we're not talking about it so much today. Number two, it's a local tax, right? And the problems we have are at the state level. It's not a problem. It's not a solution to the state's fiscal problems. So the focus of the Fiscal Reform Task Force was sales and income taxes. Everyone knows that what we've done with our sales tax base is a disaster. National groups that rank these things have had to come up with new lows to describe our sales tax strategy. We have the highest rate. We have the most disjointed and confusing base. We have the most cumbersome and inefficient administrative regime when you consider multiple state and local jurisdictions, and again, maddeningly inconsistent bases against which individual pennies of the state and local tax base are applied. All around debacle. Everyone knows we have to fix it. And that fix is broaden the base, lower the rate. If we simply standardize around the base for the last penny that was passed a couple of years ago and adopt the same base that Texas uses for all of its pennies, we could drop the rate from 5 to 4 cents at the state level. We could then take the next step and make it more uniform across state and local jurisdictions, go to state centralized collection, and our sales tax regime will be simpler, fairer, and more competitive with our neighbors. Our governor knows this. He can and does give this speech down at the Capitol, but what does he hear? Crickets, or worse, this.
Bueller. 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 Bueller.
He's sick. My best friend's sister's boyfriend's brother's girlfriend heard from this guy who knows his kid is going with the girl who saw Ferris pass out at 31 Flavors last night. Guess it's pretty serious.
Thank you, Simone.
No problem whatsoever.
So that's the legislature playing hooky, in case you didn't. So the same simple formula works for individual and corporate income taxes. Broaden the base, lower the rate. Our individual rates of 2%, 4%, and 6% can be reduced by 25% at each bracket level to 1.5%, 3%, and 4.5% by getting rid of several exemptions and deductions. On the corporate side, a flat 5 or 6% would be possible instead of our top rate of 8%. Now, the tough one in this is the deductibility of federal income taxes paid. That's the sacrifice to make this happen. In my opinion, I would argue it's worth it to get simplification and lower rates. If all of this sounds familiar, it's the exact same debate they're having in Washington, D.C. I told you it was going to be easy. All right, I'm going to switch gears now and talk about my two favorite Baton Rouge institutions, Lamar Advertising and Louisiana State University. Both are venerable. Lamar is celebrating its 115th anniversary this year. LSU is recognizing the 140th anniversary of the merger that created LSU A&M. As I mentioned, Louisiana's flagship coalition was founded to help steer LSU through the tough financial times that hit after the Great Recession and the resulting rapid loss of state support in the years that followed. Our thinking was simple and very practical. Let's give LSU the tools to manage through the crisis, to manage more like a private business and less like a public agency. We wanted to allow LSU to control its business practices free of bureaucratic shackles that are tying up state agencies everywhere. Areas like procurement, risk management, investment management, and to a limited degree setting their own fees and tuition.
I do have a test today that wasn't built. It's on European socialism. I mean, really, what's the point? I'm not European. I don't plan on being European. So who gives a crap if they're socialists? They can be fascist anarchists. It still wouldn't change the fact that I don't own a car.
That was a little harder to connect back to the topic, but I just like that one. So, looking back, I think we can safely say that it worked and that LSU emerged from those difficult times a stronger institution. The efficiencies I mentioned in procurement, risk management, et cetera, have saved and will save LSU literally tens of millions of dollars. The tuition and fee autonomy helped LSU replace virtually every dollar for dollar, that it lost in state support. We also led the charge to make LSU more structurally efficient and administratively more efficient, creating one LSU, if you will, an integrated, comprehensive, cohesive university led by a chancellor president, instead of the collection of campuses and schools orbiting somewhat independently in the old system. That made LSU look much more like the peers against which we compete, and I would maintain that eventually it'll help us rise in the national rankings. Y'all heard from King last week, and I love to cite his indicia for success in ranking in higher ed. It's the bang for the buck test. LSU graduates carry less debt and earn more both in early and mid-career salaries than the vast majority of our peers, period. And in my book, that's the most important ranking for parents and students. All right, finally, a quick update on Lamar.
It's not that I keep up fascism, or any ism for that matter. Isms, in my opinion, are not good. A person should not believe in an ism. He should believe in himself. I quote John Lennon, "I don't believe in Beatles, I just believe in me." A good point there. After all, he was a walrus. I could be the walrus. I'd still have to bum rides up with people.
Like LSU, Lamar needed to find ways to do things better and more efficiently as we managed through the Great Recession. As we watched our revenues decline and our stock drop from 60 to 6, we looked at every expense for savings. We looked at every process to do things better. We continued to pioneer digital. We replaced paper and paste with fully recyclable polyethylene. We got lean. We got mean. Unfortunately, we had to lay off about 600 people. But as the old adage goes, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger, and Lamar is certainly stronger today. I'm going to leave you with a few numbers. When Lamar went public 20 years ago, we had 120 million in revenues, about 800 employees, and an enterprise value of about $900 million. Today, Lamar enjoys revenues of over 1.5 billion. We have 3,500 employees and an enterprise value over $9 billion. We do innovative campaigns for our customers in every corner of the country, from the airport in Portland to digital billboards in Boston and all points in between. We are now a REIT and have many happy shareholders. My wise and wonderful mother, Dee Dee, who many of you know and who turned 85 yesterday, told me once what to do when your reality exceeds your wildest expectations. Keep it to yourself. Sorry, Dee Dee.